Definitely. And I guess to complicate matters potentially, and when we were talking earlier just about the health systems work that you do in complex and potentially, dysfunctional systems. And then Keith, I know that MSI does work in conflict and post-conflict areas. So I guess I'm just wondering if one or both of you can expand on that and how much that complicates a situation and how, those potentially dysfunctional systems really need to be accounted for in, I guess, the preparation of what kind of M&E you're going to put in place.
And you want to take the first crack this time?
Sure, I'll try. I think there's been a shift, at least in the health sector, to looking much more at how systems perform and understanding that our end goal is national health systems that can provide services to people over the long term, and that our mechanisms for doing that might be projects or programs or interventions, but in the end it's the system that needs to change. And when you're talking about a system, you're talking about a lot of moving parts that aren't always moving collectively in the right direction. So you really need to understand that complexity to be able to be a good practitioner in the health sector. That requires us to step back and use different kinds of methods to map out what the needs are and where the barriers are, and then to define strategies over time to address those things. One of the areas that we've been investing in a lot is case study evaluation, and we're doing it prospectively in some cases and retrospectively in others as a learning technique. And case studies help you understand complexity. They're meant to actually unpack all of the different variables that are in place, looking at how they relate to each other, and try and unpack the story of what's happening or what has happened. And this is a case study not for learning purposes, but as a research methodology that asks the standard set of research questions over time. They're very helpful, especially if you're doing multiple case studies, to try and understand why things work in some settings and not in others. They do help us understand that context makes a huge difference, and that while programs might work in one place, we need to understand whether they're able to be replicated in other places or scaled up from one part of the country to the other. And it really forces us to not just take one methodology to answer our questions, but to combine, like you said, the mixed methods to not only answer is it working, but how and why are things working, and whether the context is playing a strong role in this or whether it's not playing a strong role. The complexity question is really taking off in the health sector because of our health systems approach now, but we're still having to I don't want to say combat, but to struggle with the fact that most M&E systems in the past have been very linear. They've been all about inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes, measuring towards results. And somewhere in the middle is actually a methodology that, as Keith said, helps us to learn, not just to report. And acknowledgement of the complexity that we deal with is I think, a first step in trying to get us to be much more focused on learning and M&E systems that help us learn.
It's exciting to listen to Anne talk about this because I think that, let's just take randomized control trials for a second. Randomized control trials are a wonderful tool, and they're particularly good at testing hypotheses. But testing hypotheses is only one aspect of all of the issues and questions and points that we have to look at in the field of development. I think the health system strengthening discussion, which Anne just talked about, is a great case in point. The fact that case study methodology, which really allows for attention to a incredibly rich set of potential facilitators and constraints and factors, is probably a great approach to that. I'll probably look forward to exploring that more. I'm going to take a slightly different tact on this. You talked about complex systems and also complex environments. I'll take a little bit of a tack on the complex environments. So we work in a lot of places: Afghanistan, Iraq, South Sudan, and several others, which are unstable and sometimes unsafe. And we have to. What's interesting is that these are also the kinds of the places where the U.S. government and other donors are spending an increasingly large portion of their funds. So you've got a lot more money and a lot more actors moving into places which are increasingly difficult to collect data in. And those organizations, those donor organizations, have a very serious accountability concern in those places because they're spending a lot of money and because their taxpayers are wondering whether and to what extent that money is being well spent. So I think that what you're seeing in terms of sort of emerging issues and innovations to respond to those issues is this whole field of verification. So verification has become an important, increasingly important, if you will, sort of functional area inside the M&E world, and it requires a different set of technologies and approaches than we typically use. So that means we have to do a lot of essentially remote monitoring. Most folks are familiar with satellite imagery and aerial photography. We also have to now look at issues like environmental sensors that essentially are, do not require human intervention in order to collect the data and are still providing data on a continual basis. We have to look at things, even consider things in the right situation, obviously not in insecure places, related to sort of the ability of drone technology to pick up information. So as we get into this whole world of verification, we're expanding the technologies that we use because we have to collect data in very demanding environments, and we actually have to collect somewhat different types of data in those demanding environments. So I think that, just like the recognition of the complexity of the systems that we're working in, the recognition of the complexity of the environments we're working in, and the instability of those environments is forcing us into new ways of thinking, adjustments to existing technologies, and sometimes development of whole new technologies in order to get the information that managers and planners need.